All right.
All right, great, thank you. All right, the time is 6:31. I'd like to call the Monday, August 16, 2021, Amity Regional Board of Education meeting to order. If you would please join in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have one item we wanted to slide in under number 2, and that would be a motion, if someone would please make this for us, to amend the agenda. We need to hold an election for the vice chair of the board of ed position. This is a position that was vacated by Pat Cardozo, who did not run for re-election. So if someone would like to make that motion to put that in under item 2, I would appreciate it.
I'll make the motion to amend the agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Eichley. Would someone like to second? Awesome, thank you. All those in favor?
Hi.
And then, if you're okay, I will just call out your names and I'll just need to have you raise your hands. So Dr. Oladell, Ms. Schuster, Dr. Turner, and Mr. Reed. Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the motion has been made. We can take nominations.
Yes,
For that position
so
of-
just in brief, we will, according to board bylaw 9120, if there's a vacancy of any officer position during the course of the year, the board membership shall act promptly, commencing no later than the next regularly scheduled meeting to elect a new officer to fill the vacancy, and the new officer will take office immediately upon completion of the election. As a reminder, the role of the vice chair acts in place of the chairperson when necessary and presides at meetings when the chairperson is absent. The vice chair cannot fill vacancies that are required to be filled by the chair and does not serve as an ex officio member of committees. The vice chair works with the chair and the superintendent to be informed of board business. In the absence of the chair, acts as a resource to the superintendent on decisions which require further input in board meetings. And sorry, Mr. Belfanti, in the case of illness, resignation, or death of the chairperson, the vice chairperson, as deemed by the board, becomes the chair until the next term.
Thank you for
that
that.
wish you well. So that is the position that you are voting for. So, Mr. Belfanti, if you'd like to call for nominees.
I would call for nominees from any of the members of the board. Mr. Davis.
I would like to nominate Patrick Reed from Woodbridge.
Thank you. Is there a second on that nomination?
I'll second.
Okay, second, thank you. Is there any other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Dr. Turner from Bethany.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Howard. Is there a second for Dr. Turner? All right, is there any other nominations? Okay, well, we will close nominations and we will vote on one candidate that was seconded, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So all those in favor, unless there's any comments all right. I think Mr. Reed would do a very nice job myself. I'd just like to put that out there. I appreciate the nomination. I think Ms. Turner would have as well. I think it's very important that the vice chair of the Board of Ed is complementary to the chair in that this person is from a different town and perhaps even a different party. I think it offers some balance to the board, and it shows the community that we are inclusive of all 3 towns, which is what we're about. So I appreciate the nomination. So we could call that roll.
Yes, so I guess those that are, we should call for.
All right, all those that are in favor of Mr. Reed becoming Vice Chair of the Board of Ed, please signal by raising your hand.
Okay, and then I will get the hands. So Dr. Oladell, Dr. Turner, Ms. Schuster, Mr. Reed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so that motion passes. Mr. Reed, congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item would be the approval of minutes. We have 3 meetings. The first is the regular meeting of June 14th, 2021, found on page 3. Would someone like to make a motion to accept those minutes?
So moved.
Mr. Davis, would someone like to second, please? Mr. Federa, thank you. Any comments regarding the minutes? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to call the roll on that, the vote. All those in favor, please signal by raising your hand.
All right, and then I see Dr. Oladell, Turner, Schuster, and Ms. Reed. Okay.
Okay, so there's no no's, there's no abstentions. So that motion passes. The second one is the Board of Education special meeting held on June 16th, 2021. Minutes are found on page 13. Would someone like to make a motion to accept those minutes? Mr. Howard, thank you. We have a second. Ms. Hubbard, thank you. Any comments? Okay, seeing none, I'll call that vote. All those in favor, please signal by raising their hand.
All right, and I see Dr. Oladell, Dr. Turner, Ms. Schuster, and Mr. Reed.
Is there any no's or abstentions? One abstention.
From Ms. Carlson.
Ms. Carlson, thank you. That motion passes. The third is the Board of Education special meeting on July 26, 2021, on page 15. Would someone like to make a motion to accept those minutes?
I'll make the motion.
Cycle, thank you. Do we have a second? Mr. Howard, thank you. Any comments regarding those? Okay. Seeing none, we'll call that. So all those in favor, please signal.
All right. So, Ms. Perry, you got those?
I can't really see.
Okay, so it's Mr. Belmonte, Ms. Eichler, Mr. Howard, Ms. Hubbard, and Dr. Severe. And then I didn't see the screen. Dr. Oladell, Ms. Schuster, Dr. Turner. Okay, so those are your yeses.
Yes, is any no's? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to abstentions. Any abstentions?
And that's Mr. Benea, Mr. Davis, and Ms. Carlson, and Mr. Reed.
Okay, thank you. That motion passes. Moving on to item 4, our student report. I believe we have our students with us this evening. Hello,
Yeah,
everyone.
Hi, guys. So I'll start off with the high school report. So at the high school, students have been enjoying their summer. Students and families have stayed informed through emails from administration about the plans for the upcoming school year. Recently, Amity Embers handed out yearbooks during a distribution event for the senior class. Yearbooks will be given to other students at the beginning of the upcoming school year. Just a few weeks ago, the creative theater program at the high school deservedly won the Sondheim Award for Best Musical for their 2021 production of Anastasia. Additionally, students who took part in AP exams have, for the most part, received their scores. Most students received these in late July. Lastly, Link Crew is scheduled to move forward with in-person training sessions and a freshman orientation. The orientation will take place. Sorry? Okay, sorry, I thought someone said something. The orientation will take place on the 27th, and leaders are looking forward to meeting the incoming 9th graders.
Hi, everyone. So I'll move on to the middle school report. So the middle schools are looking forward to welcoming new and returning students. They have been keeping parents informed through emails during the summer. And through July and August, the Orange Middle School has been getting incoming 7th graders acquainted with the school through appointment-only small group tours. The one-on-one device plan is also in full swing, with laptop pickup at AMSO being scheduled for August 17th. And schedules and bus information will be released to middle school students and families soon. And this concludes the student report.
Okay, thank you, students. Do any members of the board have any questions for our students? Well, thank you for your first report of this academic year. I look forward to seeing you for the next one. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 5, public comment. We have, I see some people here this evening. I'm going to just read a quick statement regarding public comment. At this time, the board would like to invite members of the public up to the lectern for public comment. Please state your full name and address. If you're a student under the age of 18, please state only your first name. Each speaker will be allowed up to 3 minutes for public comment. Also, the board reserves its right to limit the public comment on any one subject to 20 minutes. Please note that as a matter of board policy, the board does not respond to public comments or questions, but may discuss the subject in a response if appropriate at a future time. Is there anyone who would like to start?
I'll start.
And we would just ask if you could come up to the podium, that will allow people who are at home to see you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Cheryl Worth, and I live at 27 Ranch Road.
Thank you, yes.
Yes, I'm writing as a parent, and like all parents and guardians who want a safe, supportive educational environment for all children. When reading the recent community letter, I was very concerned about the policy, which is supposed to support the health and safety of all children. It states that close contacts will be required to quarantine unless they are fully vaccinated and feeling well. Vaccinated students and staff will not be required to quarantine if they are feeling well. Exactly. Why are there two different sets of rules for vaccinated and unvaccinated? This policy seems problematic for families who are vaccinated and those who are unvaccinated. Here's my example. If student A tests positive for COVID and student B and C are both in close contact, if student B is vaxxed and student C is not, they both can contract COVID, they both can spread COVID, and they both can be asymptomatic. So why is one group being singled out to be quarantined? The people on this side should be concerned because if their child is feeling well and in school, they can still contract and spread COVID. These people should be concerned as well. And I have friends on both sides. And I've talked about this at length, and it's a very emotional subject for me. And I support their decisions on either end, because we all have the right to our choices for our families. The CDC states, and I quote, "No vaccines are 100% effective at preventing illness in vaccinated people." So if we're truly concerned about students staying safe, there should be no discrimination between the two groups. If they can all spread it, we need to be concerned about both sides of this. They also say that vaccine breakthrough cases will occur. Even though the vaccines are working, asymptomatic infections among vaccinated people also will occur. So both sides can equally spread it. So again, I ask the question, why would one group be quarantined and one not, when they can both spread it? And it states if a student or staff member is feeling well and they are vaccinated, they will not have to quarantine. But what if the unvaccinated student is feeling well? They should have the right to stay in school too, or they all should be quarantined. If they can all spread it, we should be concerned. So the following questions therefore arise. How long is quarantine for these kids? What type of education are healthy asymptomatic students who are forced to be home receiving? If they have an IEP, how is this being implemented? I'm asking the board to please discuss these questions. Students are willing and able to attend school when they cannot. Asynchronous learning does not replace in-person learning. We know this. Last year, I saw at the end of the first marking period, the failure rates were astronomical in a very high achieving district. We're talking about kids who want to be in school. I'm a teacher. I know the anxiety and depression levels of students who were quarantined last year. They skyrocketed. And this is with synchronous learning. Quarantining any healthy student who wants to be in school only increases their stress and anxiety and possibly sets them up for failure and to get behind in their studies, and puts more pressure on teachers to make sure those kids get caught up. In addition, by segregating one group of students, you are violating the right to privacy. The nature of quarantining healthy students in close contact involuntarily gives out their private medical information in regards to vaccine status.
If you could finish it, we're over.
Okay, if you think about how the kids feel and how the staff feels regarding this, their medical information should be kept private. They should have a right to privacy. No child wants to be discriminated against, no parent wants their child to be discriminated against. As at the last board meeting where there was talk about discrimination and racial injustice, and that was very concerning to me. I didn't know that existed in the school. I support parents' right to choose, and in closing, I just want you to thoughtfully review the policy and please remind teachers that they should not be saying, can everybody raise their hand if you're vaccinated? That happened last year. That makes kids feel insecure. Kids whose parents were maybe on the fence. Either way, teachers, I'm a teacher. That is not my job to be asking. That's their medical information. We have to hold that sacred. We have to support all kids. Please consider these policies and how it affects the children. Please.
I'm James Turco, I live at 14 Bear Hill Road, Woodbridge. I don't have any children in the Amity system yet, but I will soon enough. I have 3 younger ones. I just have some concerns, like general concerns for the most part. I feel like I'm in Groundhog Day to an extent. Like we're still talking about this, having the same conversation as we had last year. We've wrecked 2 school years already, in part, in some to varying degrees for varying people. Now we're working on a 3rd. So, I mean, among minors, we have a survival rate well north of 99.9% for this virus. I don't know how low that needs to go for the kids to be allowed to resume their typical interactions and typical activities. And I mean, still less dangerous than seasonal flu, even with the Delta variant, despite what they were individually saying. CDC's own numbers are bearing that out. And now, I know you have to follow guidelines, there are guidelines, state guidelines, CDC guidelines. Maybe there's nothing you can do, maybe there is, I don't know. These experts don't always know a lot about education. So it's up to educators to push back when some of this could come down as detrimental things to the education of the children. We just heard about some of the issues. There's like a mountain of evidence that's kind of accumulating about some of these potential ill effects when kids missing out on their typical activities, their typical educations. But and then on the other side of that, you have very little or no evidence almost that children are a major source of secondary transmission to adults or in general. So the worst part here is that we really don't have much of an exit strategy. It seems like I know that you're not in charge of the exit strategy necessarily, this board, but I just want everyone to keep all this in mind as this goes on we're going on to year 2, year 3. And I mean, no mitigation strategy thus far has eradicated COVID. Vaccination hasn't eradicated COVID, and it can't eradicate it now, at least with the current landscape, based on what they're finding with their Delta variant spreading throughout vaccinated individuals, just as much as unvaccinated. So when does it end? Does the state tell you when it ends? Does somebody does Joe Biden get to say it's over? I mean, he tried that once and it didn't work, apparently. I mean, my oldest is entering 4th grade. Now, do you think we're still going to be engaged in this in 3 years when he comes into the Amity system? I mean, that would have sounded completely insane a year ago, but here we are, right? I mean, nothing's changed almost. So the state health authority is looking at numbers on a spreadsheet. A lot of times it's going to be left in context and not necessarily looking out for the education and the mental well-being of the children. That's the job of the parents first and foremost, and bodies like this board need to not tie our hands in that process. They need to be in school, they need to be with their friends, they need to be, and I know they are, but it's just not, it's still a crazy world out there. And I just don't know that we're doing all that we can to prevent the schools from being part of the problem rather than part of the solution. I don't want to minimize the efforts that everyone made over the last year in a tough situation, but this just can't go on forever. That's about it. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ed Falvey, 12 Hillcrest Road, Orange. I also don't have any kids in the system. I'm the opposite though. My kids have already graduated. So why am I here? because I feel passionate for what the two before me just spoke about. So I'm going to try to take what they said, expand upon that. First off, it was 14 days to flatten the curve. Now we're almost 600 days to extend the curve. And I keep being told, as I teach swimming lessons at the town pool, and they had masks, they didn't have masks, now they're back to masks. Show me the data. Everybody keeps saying, and I'm sure you say this thing, we're following the CDC, we're following the health director. Okay, show me the data. Show me the data that masks work and stop viral spread, not aerosol particles, which, by the way, Dr. Mohammed in Orange sent me a case study. Now, I'm not a clinician, but I spent 30 years in medical science. If I stood in front of a doctor with a case study, they'd laugh me out of the room. Here's a doctor who sent me a case study showing it stopped aerosol particles. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with the Brown University, the Louisville study, the Danish study, the German study, and when you put all those people together, you've got millions of kids that they studied. And masks don't work, bottom line. The CDC has 3 randomized control studies. For those of you who understand the medical field, those are the gold standard of studies, randomized controlled trial. Then the next thing is the Cochrane review, where they do a meta-analysis of all that data. Masks don't work. Fauci has said it in his emails. I have those emails. And then people say, well, it's different with COVID. No, it's not. It's a respiratory virus. It's not different. So masks don't work. And very interesting in the Brown University study, hardly a bastion of conservative studies, by the way. They looked at Florida, Texas, unmasked since September, and they looked at Massachusetts and New York, masked. They had, out of the students, 19 cases out of 100,000 in the unmasked. And in the masked, 26 out of 100K. The real interesting was the staff. Still 19 in the unmasked out of 100K. 35 out of 100K, an 84% increase. Why? They don't know, because masks don't work, period. They don't work. Now onto the vaccine. They were just announced today another booster. Great, another booster. So if you're going to segregate, to Cheryl's point, the kids, which I thought Amity was all about inclusion, so that's pretty interesting too. How about if they have one vaccine, Pfizer? Are they okay then? Or do they have to have 2? Do they have to have the booster then? So these are all logical questions. I'm not that bright of a guy, but I'm a pretty logical and skeptical guy. So I ask questions. People say something to me, I was like, that doesn't make sense. I ask questions. The other thing is hepatitis A, B, HIV, AIDS, West Nile, viral meningitis, far more deadly and dangerous to kids under 18 than COVID. Not even close. You're going to ask for all the people, you're going to ask everybody, do they have those vaccines? Where are they and where are they in reference to the other cases?
Finish up.
Okay. Because we're at 3.5 minutes.
Sure.
All right. So logical questions to think about, because it really doesn't make any sense. And again, any who disagree with me, I'll give you my email. I'm begging you to send me the data, because I'm just not good.
I'm speaking on behalf of my son, who has an IEP. I'm sure there's a lot of you out there that also have that. My son's experience with school was horrible these last 1.5 years, 2 years. If it wasn't for his 2 special ed teachers, he would have not only failed, he would have emotionally lost, he would have broke down. His special ed teachers saved us. And I made sure I told them and their principals. Without them, we would have failed. I was losing my mind. I work at Yale University. I was trying to maintain my job, trying to help him. He was in 8th grade crying over work. This was really challenging for him. Currently, he has a health condition that may or may not keep him from getting the vaccine. I need to know what's going to happen if he gets exposed. We got a lot of emails and a lot of text messages from high school about cases. We go to our high school, they had very few cases. But what happens if he walks in here
and he's exposed. And now he goes home for 14 days. There doesn't seem to be, and I may be wrong, and if I am, I apologize. There doesn't seem to be a plan in place for kids that will have to quarantine. And I understand if he has to quarantine, until we know what his medical condition is, we're not gonna be able to get him the vaccine. So he's gonna start without it. And I should have said this to begin with, but I don't hold any of you accountable, and I feel for all of you. This is a very difficult position to be in, and I feel for you. And I am not picking sides, I am not looking to stir the pot. But when you have a child who has an IEP, you are their advocate. And I will be his advocate I'll be his advocate when he's a CEO of a company. I will advocate for him. So I need that clear to me before he goes to school on the 30th, because I'm afraid that he's gonna get exposed on the first day of school. And then there we are. And I don't have 2 special ed teachers who are going to fight for him, because we weren't even able to come in here and meet the special ed team yet. So I have a lot of concerns. And again, I am not looking to stir the pot. I am looking to fight for my kid. And I feel for all of you that are in these positions. They're difficult, these times are challenging, and I give you all credit for staying in your positions, because I don't know that I will. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dennis Mantu, I live at 27 Ranch Road. We have 3 girls that are in high school. 2 of them are typically excel, but their 8th grade curriculum was not complete. Now we have 2 kids that are simply struggling, where the other one who has an IEP is also struggling. I mean, I don't think the school, I don't think the education here was even thought about. You had ample time from we shut down until the start of the next curriculum year. They didn't do anything. These kids are isolated, they're depressed, their fail rate is going up, the suicide rate is going up. I was at the meeting last Board of Ed meeting, and these kids were yelling and screaming at the racism, discrimination. Most of the African American kids. Now, statistically, 30% of the African American kids do not get the vaccine. They just simply don't get it. Are they going to be discriminated against more? The vaccine does not. Once again, the vaccine does not prevent anybody from not transmitting it. A vaccine, you get a vaccine. What does it do? It builds your antibodies. So when you do get exposed to it, what does it do? You don't get the symptoms or reduce your symptoms, but that doesn't mean you're not transmitting that viral load. So I would appreciate it, please. If like Cheryl said, my beautiful wife, A and B come in contact with somebody, the rules should be equal across the board. One specific isolation of a specific group, all it is discriminating against it. It's a breach of their civil rights. If you don't think that is happening, it's crazy. In these masks. We have to wear the mask, that's fine. But you know, we have children that have a 99.997% chance of surviving. 14 kids died in Connecticut. 0 with comorbidities. Every single one that died had comorbidities. Think about it. If I went like this, everybody in this room, we have a 99% chance of never getting cancer. But you know something? We'll give you a vaccine. And I'm not sure if the vaccine works, doesn't work. We'll give you some chemotherapy. You can take it, but I'll tell you what. It wasn't really tested. It didn't go through the rigors that a normal vaccine will go through. And if something happens to you, you can't go after the pharmaceutical companies, you can't go after the school, you can't go after the government when you take it. No, but that's your choice. But people, then you're going to discriminate against people who have serious illness. They can't get the vaccine. You're going to point them out as well. It was disgusting. All the racism and discrimination that I heard from all these children last time. Please, if you're going to make a rule, it needs to be a blanket. If you care for people, and someone has an exposure to COVID, whether they're vaccinated or not, the only thing the vaccine is stated that's supposed to do is reduce your symptoms, period. Thank you so much.
and I'm at 356 Lambert Road in Orange. The biggest concern of mine, one, like everybody else stated, the masks don't do anything. If you look at the particle sizes, your breath goes through you. If you can smell through these masks, you can breathe everything. You can breathe in the germs, you can breathe in everything. Germs is what actually makes us strong, okay? It also blocks us from breathing properly. Underdeveloped lungs can cause major health issues. I don't feel pushing mask mandates or vaccine mandates on any of our children should be required. It should be left up to the parents and the children, not up to the Board of Education. You're here to educate, you're here to teach literature, math, correct history, not this crap of social justice. You are here to correct, or teach correct school. You are not here to push agendas. You are not here for any other purpose. In regards to some of the other comments regarding the other vaccines that you get, just so you're aware, tuberculosis, there are 13 million people living in the United States currently, and that's as of 2019. 13 million people living in the United States with tuberculosis, which is spread through sneezing, coughing, speaking, singing. Where are your masks if everything is so scary? Where's the outrage? It's disgusting that you people are pushing, and you're making things mandatory. It should be left up to the parent, not you. I understand other people's concerns on either side of the fence, and it should be left up to them. Not you. Thank you.
I kind of feel like first time I stepped up at the Board of Education meeting, Mike have done it from 370 Grassy Hill, Orange. A lot to do with the masks. I have a daughter in 6th grade at Peck Place. It's interesting to me, we don't have to wear masks here. My daughter has to wear a mask at school. She leaves school, she goes to a softball practice. Kids from 3 schools, 3 towns. No requirement by Little League, no requirement by Girl Scouts for masks. How do you justify that when we're crisscrossing towns and kids and parents? You can't trace any of that. How does that work? How are you going to do your vaccine? Everybody has to be isolated. If my daughter is with your daughter from another town, from another school, from another team. Now you've got travel teams going all over the state. None of these. How are you justifying what's going on? That's my question. You're not even holding the kids to a standard across the entire town. My daughter can go play softball against Milford, Woodbridge, North Branford. She can run 3 bases, end up on 3rd base, next to you as the 3rd base coach, no mask, hacking, breathing heavy, and it's allowed. But how do you justify we have to do this here? And like everybody else is saying, show us the data, put it in a town paper, what you're basing it on. Put it out there. And I guarantee if you put 10% legitimate data, me, the other woman who's nervous, will go, hey, okay, you're doing your job, but show us something. Because when I can go to the Orangetown Fair and see 3,000 kids unmasked, and then I'll do it here, standing this close in line with their parents. And then you tell me 2 weeks later, we didn't come to school and they got a mask. Did we get a super spreader out of the town fair? I didn't think so. How about the Orangetown Fair coming up in September 18th, 19th? How are you gonna, all the kids going to that, coming in Monday morning? What are you gonna do? Oh, Johnny gave it to me? No, how about you gave it to me, standing next to a booth? Just my thoughts as I'm sitting here as a first parent coming up. Difficult decisions you guys gotta make. But what you do is affecting stuff that I hope you all have kids in here that you didn't think about too.
Or no, you're not, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to come back. Anyone else tonight? All right, thank you, everyone, I appreciate it. Like I said in the beginning, we will, we don't respond to the meeting, but we take into account all comments. We discuss them amongst ourselves, we discuss them with our superintendent. If it goes to respond to the community and differently than we have in the past, we will certainly do so. And we appreciate all your interest and all your comments. So, moving on.
Excuse me, Mr. Amity, there's two written
Oh, yes.
comment statements.
Thank you.
One of them was from Cheryl Work, which we heard from earlier. The second one was from Kim Franklin, Nazarene Ulisi, Emily Melnick, and Matt McDermott on behalf of the Amity community for DEI. And I'll read some of this so everyone can hear, but everyone on the board has also received the statement already, and it will be in the minutes. Dear ADOE members, we write to express our surprise and disappointment that the posted agenda for your meeting tonight on August 16th does not include discussion or action in response to serious and urgent concerns that many students, parents, and community leaders expressed to you on racial intolerance and harassment happening at Amity schools at your last public meeting on June 14th. We are concerned that the board does not provide a mechanism for real-time public comment in virtual format. There's concerns about students coming to school, being harmed every day as they walk the school building, that the needs of these students have not been addressed with public transparent dialogue, concerns that ignoring the work is ignoring their pain, and being silent on the racism that's happening in the school reinforces this. The school must find a way to help the Black students that feel like they belong and make sure they're safe at Amity High School. There's concerns that the administration is not doing enough and has not been successful. There's been a group of parents that have met with Dr. Byers, Principal Mann, Principal Tracy, and Principal Burke. And there's concerns that not enough board members have been present at these meetings. And it goes on to continue their concerns regarding link group program, events at the middle school and the high school, assemblies, and lack of communication on this matter. And there's the full statement that everyone could read.
Thanks. Okay, thank you. Moving on, we're going to go to item 6, the superintendent report. Dr. Byers.
Right, so beginning on page 16, you will see the personnel report. As is typical in the month of July, it's a long one. So we have been busy hiring a lot of our new teaching staff, as well as some of our non-certified positions, coaches and transfers. And you'll also see some resignations on there, but we have new teacher orientation beginning on Monday, the 23rd and 24th. And I actually don't have a count of how many new staff members we've hired, but it's getting well into year 20, I believe. So it will be a fairly busy new teacher orientation. So going on to the superintendent's report, starting on page 19. A couple of things that I would just like to recognize. First of all, we did have a very successful summer school program here, both for regular ed services for middle school students, rising 7th, 8th, and 9th grade students, our extended school year for some of our special education students, and then our credit recovery program for our high school students. And so for the most part, those occurred during the month of July. And we had a fairly busy amount of attendance here at the school. I would like to point out that we have our first ever Amity Transition Academy graduation, with students aging out at different points during their year when they turn 22 years old. We can't really have a formal graduation the way we do for our typical peers. However, on August 27th, we will sort of be celebrating those students who either have aged out or will be aging out soon as they leave us from the Amity Transition Academy. I'd like to recognize Mr. Eric Bassett, who was named the School Psychologist of the Year for the Connecticut Association of School Psychologists, and he is going on for nomination representing the state of Connecticut for the National School Psychologist of the Year. And lastly, I just wanted to let the board know that we had the second of 2 informational meetings about the No Place for Hate program, which is organized and run and supported by the ADL. This is trying to encourage participation in No Place for Hate is not new to Amity. It's something that we started to try to garner support for back in spring of 2019. And it is clearly a student-driven program. I believe at the information session today, they did say that the committee that they like to have is about a 2-to-1 ratio of students to adults in the building. I will say that the information session was probably about a 5-to-1 ratio of adults to students today, but it certainly shows that we have some interest from our students. I would also like to share that we did share the Zoom link to all of the parent members who are part of the DEI committee. I wasn't able to see if any of them were on there, but we did invite them to at least hear that information so that they could be informed of some of the work that we are looking at to do next year. Speaking of the DEI committee, we have had 2 meetings since our last board meeting back in June. And yes, Ms. Mann, Ms. Burke, and Dr. Tracy are part of those, as well as Mr. Davis from the Board of Education. I can sort of summarize that the first meeting I would say was kind of like a telling of stories and an introduction and sort of establishing why people were at the table. And then the second meeting was really an opportunity to start to address some of the goals that they had shared for us that they were hoping to see achieved. This included providing an explanation for how we select advisors for student clubs. This case specifically related to the Black Student Union, which was their concern. We also discussed this as work that is not really restricted to Amity, but really should be work of BOA. And we recognize that some of the elementary districts already have diversity committees in place. Some of the towns have diversity committees in place. Some of them don't at all. And just having that disconnect is just another one of those challenges that we see as a regional school district. So this is on the agenda to discuss with BOA superintendents when we meet this week. We discussed the role of a consultant and what their objectives were in requesting one and what they were hoping to achieve by having a consultant on board. You know, some of the things that we do have coming up, like I said, we will have a conversation about this amongst the BOA superintendents. We have identified a consultant that the district would like to work with, and so we want to approach her and see what her recommendations would be for a district committee and for district work in this area. You know, again, I want it to be clear that this is a parent group that we are attending their meetings and hearing from them. It is not an Amity-based committee yet, and that would be some of the work that we would like to establish with the consultant, and also to see whether it's really an Amity committee or a BOA committee moving forward. The board will certainly have an opportunity to have these conversations at your board retreat planned for in September, and I know Mr. Belfanti will talk about that. We've already pulled all the leveling data for the past 4 years to look at who is being placed into which level classes from the middle schools up to the high schools. And longer term, we will look again at some critical analysis of our curriculum, the resources we're using, and then the coaching and the PD that we need to sort of take the training that we've done through Courageous Conversations or through NCCJ and to actually operationalize that in our classrooms. And then finally, I mentioned the No Place for Hate designation that we are trying to work on, not just for the high school, but for the 2 middle schools as well, which would make Amity the first district in Connecticut to have that designation at all 3 levels. So that is currently where we are with some of those efforts. I did suggest that we would probably be best fit scheduling a meeting with them in October, simply because we just have to spend the month of September trying to get school up and running. And I do want to sort of touch bases, circle back around with my fellow colleagues before we do that. I think that's it for the report.
Okay, excellent. Reopening plan updates, I mean,
Yeah, hang on a second, let me pull up the share screen.
got it. Mr. Byers, do you have a scheduled meeting for the DEI in the future? I'm sorry if I missed that.
No, I told them that I would reach back to them at some point in October, but I really wanted to meet with the both superintendents just to get a sense where they are, and then with the consultant that I hope to work with, to see what her recommendations would be before we schedule anything further. All right, and so for everybody who's zooming at home, just so that you know, I'm going to minimize things, so I won't be able to see you if you raise your hands. So you'll just have to hold your questions until the very end when I can see faces again, or else we can't see the presentation. Okay. All right, so really this isn't anything that's terribly different. Sorry, I don't know what our test screen doesn't work. Oh, wait, there we go. All right. So this isn't that different from the letters that have gone out, and it is where we currently have information from the State Department of Education. I will share with the board probably tomorrow the letter that we received from Shipman and Goodwin, who is the law firm that typically works with a lot of school districts and consults with CAPS and the Board of Ed. But essentially, the summary of that legal opinion is that when the governor puts in an executive order, that is in effect a law that exists at that point in time. And failure to follow the law that goes into effect through an executive order makes board members personally liable, it makes the Board of Education as a whole liable, and it makes superintendents personally liable. So when we have these conversations over what reopening plans are, when the governor says this is what you're going to do through an executive order, failing to do that would be considered breaking the law. And I just want, and I will share that with you, there's a whole lot more legalese with that, but it is the reason why we follow those executive orders. The statement also explains that the Commissioner of Education, acting in the capacity of that and as appointed by the governor, when they issue guidance and mandates, those also function, as far as school districts are concerned, somewhat like the law. And so again, there's an expectation that boards of education are going to abide by those mandates and that guidance that's coming from. Do you know what that is? Does anybody know what that is?
I don't know what that is.
Never heard that sound before, so, okay.
Maybe it's a keyboard.
All right. Anyway, so that is kind of where we currently sit right now. So in terms of a summary of reopening, school buses right now, according to actually a national mandate, are considered a public transportation. And as such, public transportation requires all individuals on public transportation to wear masks. So as of right now, starting next year, both drivers and passengers on school buses will need to wear masks. Just unplug everything. I'll just take a temporary. Remember the last time somebody unplugged the phone and blew up all the phone systems in the entire district? So Dr. Tracy, this one is not on you. We will put it firmly on this one, that's what just happened. Again, as we mentioned in our letters, we are returning to full in-person, full days of school. That is across the board for middle schools and for high schools. In order to accommodate that, we will have 4 lunch waves at the high school. And we will make use of additional seating, including this presentation room. It's going to be an extension of the cafeteria, so we'll have to find a different place for board meetings or perhaps have them set up differently moving forward. We will definitely use outdoor seating in the patio area out here as well as in the courtyard. And then we will use overflow if we have to in classrooms as well as the mezzanine upstairs. Mr. DeMayo, yes?
How are kids gonna be able to choose who they sit with or not sit with? So is it going to be, this is your group and
So
alphabetically or?
we're gonna approach it the same way that we did last year when it came to study hall, which is kids tend to be creatures of habit. They sit with the same kids pretty much all the same time. And if we have to go to a point where we have to do contact tracing, we really just ask the kid, who did you sit with at lunch that day? Or who did you sit with at study hall that day? But we're not gonna have assigned seats at the high school the way that we had, if you're envisioning it at the middle school last year, where literally they had a desk and they had a number and that was where they sat.
That'll be the same at the middle school?
Yes, it will be. Middle schools will be again, so if you look at the middle schools, we're not gonna have 4 lunches, we're gonna go back to 2 lunches. It just works better for our schedule so that they can have a more typical experience in terms of rotating classes. But again, to sort of kind of spread them out, we will use both, we'll still use the outside seating area, we'll use the cafeterias and we'll use the gym. When they're in the cafeterias and the gym, that at least will be by team. So that way it's somewhat a little bit of a smaller group that we're mixing with, but again, it's not gonna look the way that it did last year with this real specific seating in the cafeterias themselves. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and then I guess the follow-up would be, as long as they're sitting at lunch, and if they're not eating, then they will be required to wear the mask, or?
That is correct. So as of right now, the guidance says that the only time that they would remove the mask would be when they were actually eating. When they're in line getting stuff, or if they're just sitting there, you know, after lunch and talking. Lunches are a little shorter, which is what we did last year at the middle school. So we learned that with sort of that 20 or 22-minute lunch, by the time that they got stuff, sat down, cleaned up, it was essentially the lunch period. So we would think that there wouldn't be that much downtime and they wouldn't be eating, but if they were just sitting there, they would wear a mask.
And then there would be discipline actions if a bunch of students, you know, is eating and then keeps the mask off? Or?
So I have put that question to the state of Connecticut for what their expectations are on that and have not received an answer yet. I will continue to send that every week, which is what I have been doing since the end of June.
Sure. But if I was to follow up on that,
Yeah.
so as of right now, the governor is stating that the office that September 30th is the deadline, but they're going to have to wear masks.
Yes, and I have that a little later in the slide. I'll go through the whole mask rules as they stand right now.
Okay, I guess my point is really after public comment, is it also true, you said the acting commissioner of education is the one who is making the mandates?
So right now it's under an executive order, so it's coming from the governor itself. Now, if he opts to then say to the commissioner of education, establish the mandates.
Yeah.
His last press release that came at the beginning of August said specifically from his office that the policies on masking for schools would be coming before the start of the school year. So whether that is coming through the State Board of Ed, the State Department of Ed, DPH, or through his office itself, it's somewhere there.
So if any member of the public wanted to make a comment or a suggestion, that would be the place to do it since it's coming.
For the people who are making the decision with
we're
respect to
mandated-
that,
right,
yes.
We're mandated to follow.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to be clear on that.
Yes. We will be providing under the federal lunch program, free lunch to all students this year, as well as free breakfast. But we are also cognizant of the fact that we didn't have a whole lot of participation in that, in part because it was grab and go, but also because choices were limited. So we are permitted to go back to what they consider to be more normal serving operations in our cafeterias. So we will see a return to what I would say are more normal lunches that are provided for free for our students and for and as well as for breakfast. I don't want anybody to think that the district is losing money when we do that, because all of those free lunches are reimbursable through the federal government. So it actually helps us, the more kids who take lunches, the more we can actually support our cafeteria account. And so, and that's, so that would be helpful for us, which is why we're doing the breakfast at the middle schools as well. And then we will not have cohorting at the middle schools the way we did last year. We'll return to a much more normal rotation between the classes and across the teams. Okay. We will be reopening the locker rooms. If you remember, those became storage areas for all of the stuff that we had to take out of classrooms last year. So those have been cleaned out and will be reopened so that we can have kids changing the way that they normally would during PE classes. Schuster. We will be using lockers at the middle schools, although I believe in a somewhat more limited capacity, not like between every single class the way we used to with the kids. But that operationally just kind of helps us a little bit as well. The recommended distancing is 3-foot spacing between students. However, the State Department of Ed and Health has made it very clear that if you are unable to achieve 3-foot spacing and that impacts your operations, that they would rather just have you do the best you can so that kids can be in school. So a perfect example of that would be our cafeteria tables at the high school, because we have to sit 5 kids to a table in order to fit everybody in. And so there is going to be a seat where the kids are not going to be 3 feet away from each other. But if we didn't do that, we couldn't run full day programs and we would be back to the early dismissal. And so that's where the trade-off comes from the perspective of the CSDE, is that do what you can to make it normal. Spread kids out as much as you can, but if you have to put them close together, we would just rather have them in school as much as they possibly can, with all the other mitigating strategies in place. The state has set a really strong expectation that students return to in-person instruction. This isn't even really through the governor. This was set as part of the last legislative session when they put forward some statutes with respect to remote learning. For the upcoming year, we will not be providing the synchronous remote instruction. However, asynchronous remote instruction will still be available. The option for parents to voluntarily remote learning no longer exists. That was something that was just in place for last year. School districts are not permitted to use remote learning for inclement weather, so we are back to a traditional snow day, so to speak. And then when a student is quarantined or isolated, we will still have maintained Google Classroom the way that we did last year, with expectations that work and activities are posted there. We would have, the students would have access to that when they are home. But just like when a kid had strep, if they were out for 5 days with strep, they had 5 days to make up that work when they came back. So in-person learning activities, like say a science lab, a student would have time to make that up when they return back to school after a quarantine or isolation period. Contact tracing, this is where Amity was ahead of the curve. So last year, I did a presentation on how we manage contact tracing. And we did everything really precisely in terms of the physical space around a index case. So even though I did send out a lot of letters about kids who had been identified as an index case, the number of kids who actually were resulting in quarantine was very low compared to other districts, because we never followed the quarantine a classroom, quarantine a grade level, quarantine everybody rule that some of our other school districts followed. So the good news is we already know how to do this. This has been a directive that the state issued, is they basically told school districts they could not do this blanket quarantine the way that occurred last year. We are under direction that quarantine is for unvaccinated individuals. If a student and or adult is vaccinated, then they do not have to quarantine. And that is currently CDC guidelines that the state DPH is following at the moment. The quarantine period is 10 days. As of right now, that was shortened last year and they're maintaining that. There is a shorter quarantine that is at the discretion of the local health departments. And it's all very specific on how many days you're out and when you get a negative test. And so I have a meeting with the local health departments at the same time that we're meeting with the BOA superintendents. We'll get feedback on what their recommendations for quarantine periods are this week. CIAC regretfully has decided to go with a different set of quarantine rules than everything else. I think when somebody's on the board of control, you get a little voice there, but apparently it doesn't work. So the CIAC quarantine is longer. With testing, it's a 10-day quarantine period, and without testing, it's a 14-day. So we still will have different quarantine periods for our athletes than we do for our students. CIAC basically, in general, the way I can put it is that they are recommending masks for indoor sports for both players and spectators, and masks are not required for outdoor athletes or athletics, and that includes the spectators, the players, coaches, and the officials.
So is the CIAC saying that if a vaccinated student is contact traced, then they will have to miss 10 days?
No, because if you're vaccinated, then there's no quarantine.
So the CIAC is the same thing as vaccination.
That is correct.
That's crazy.
So Dr. Myers, the thing about public comment, who should people contact about these issues, the discrepancies and things to?
So like, again, it's so a discrepancy between like athletics and the DPH. I would guess CIAC, but it's also DPH because CIAC works with DPH to create their guidelines. So how they've managed to make these different is, I don't know, I can't tell you that, but it's coming through CIAC, who is working in partnership with DPH.
And the executive orders are going to DPH to make these rules?
So and then it's a whole of all of these other things that we're talking about, again, it all goes back to whether it's coming through the State Department of Education or the State Department of Health or the governor's office. So it's nothing, it's just like last year, it's nothing that we decided locally here. It's coming through from what their guidelines are. Locally decided, there's one local decision, we will not be participating in the voluntary COVID testing through the school. It just seemed to be a really cumbersome program that wouldn't have a whole lot of effect for us. And as of right now, and again, I say this because I'm not promoting one thing or another, but based on the guidance, vaccination and having proof of vaccination is the way that we are going to be able to keep kids in school and in activities most quickly. Because we'll be able to remove them from quarantine lists if a student is identified as a close contact. All the schools have a place where you can drop off proof of vaccination at this point before the school year actually starts. This is specifically with respect to masking. So the executive order that's in place is 13A. And the language that is up on the board is exactly what is written in the executive order. So it requires everyone to wear masks regardless of vaccination status while inside certain settings, including schools. It is set to expire September 30th. However, this has been one of the executive orders that has consistently been renewed since March of last year. I don't know if that would actually change. And as I said, on August 5th, the governor put out a press release that said information on statewide school masking policies would be issued before the start of the year. He basically has a week and a half to figure this out before we actually have kids back. We are going to be hosting, much like we did last year, a parent and community webinar where we will take questions and answer them. That'll be sometime next week. I'm waiting because the State Department of Education is also supposed to be hosting a parent forum and webinar, and I just don't want to schedule it on the same date that they are hosting theirs. So I'm trying to get information from them as to when theirs will be held. Just real briefly, currently this is the status as of August 12th, so that's the most recent data that we have in terms of the percentage of our 12 to 17-year-old population that has received either a first dose of the vaccine or has been fully vaccinated. Based on our records, about 70% of our faculty and staff are fully vaccinated. That was probably back in June. We haven't really done much updates over the summer. That's on the left side, and then on the right side is a quick summary of this is the data that I was putting out on a weekly basis last year. So the number of cases per 100,000 in our 3 towns over the past 2 weeks, sorry, and then what our percent positivity is. And then there used to be a chart in my presentations that was kind of color coded as to the primary and secondary indicators And right now, New Haven County is in the low category for both the leading and the secondary indicators. And that's it on reopening. So. Let's hang on these guys. All right, I don't know if there's any other questions.
Dr. Byers, this is Dr. Turner. Just a clarification for the middle schools. Can the students choose to eat outside if their team is eating in the gym or the cafeteria?
Yes, they can.
Sorry, did you not hear?
No, yes, Dr. Turner, they can choose to eat outside, even if so they'll be assigned either gym or cafeteria, really in anticipation of inclement weather and it getting colder. But until then, they can eat outside.
Great. So any student at any school has the choice of outside. Thank you so much.
Dr. Byers, I have a question as well. Are 2 lunches at the middle schools adequate to keep the students adequately distanced?
Yes, they will be, because we'll be basically doubling the space inside by using the gym. And then from what we learned last year, when it's, as long as it's not like a blizzard, they just go outside and eat. They don't.
Okay, so even when it gets colder, those who desire to eat outside will be able to do so.
Yes, they will stand underneath overhangs and pouring rain and eat outside. I mean, they just go outside. But even that being said, I will again stress that the state has made it very clear that if you cannot achieve a 3-foot distancing, if it impacts your operations, you still have to go with the operations. So even if we weren't using the gym, we would just have to put them all into the cafeterias. And we figure out the best way to do that. Yes, Mr.
Last year, kids had to go home and then come back. So
for athletics. Yeah.
And then the second question would be is the other clubs and extra help and detentions and those sort of things, is that going to be brought back, or is that not?
Yes. Yeah. So because we can have the locker rooms again, because that was the big reason why kids were going home. We just didn't have, and it wasn't even really, we couldn't run the locker rooms. They were just filled with a lot of stuff. So with the locker rooms reopened, and the fact that particularly at the high school, we're now going back to a full day athletics and will be held immediately after school, and students will need to be using the locker rooms to change and then go participate. Our student clubs and activities certainly can come back into a in-person setting. But again, those are run by students. So if it is the choice of the student leaders of those clubs that they want to still operate things in a virtual manner, that's part of the control that we give to them when they are running the clubs as students. So they certainly could. But we will definitely have that back in place. You'll see when we talk about the art ESSER that we will put back our after school help and support for students. Our late buses will be back running again. So all of that's returning to normal.
So Dr. Byers, is there any plan to get more information about vaccination status for teachers and staff?
So we have the vaccination status for teachers and staff. We've collected all of that from then back in the springtime. So I'd say we have a fairly good assessment of where our vaccination rate is for our adults in our building.
Okay, so we believe that it's at around 70% right now.
I believe so. I think there could have been perhaps a few people who maybe completed a round in the summer, but I would say it's probably not going to significantly move that percentage.
Okay, I apologize. I had some computer issues. So you probably covered this. For if a child or a student comes in contact with a COVID positive person outside and they need to quarantine outside of the school, therefore there's no contact tracing in the school, do they just have access to their coursework? And is it a negative test to get back in, or is it a set quarantine period?
So it's a set quarantine period. Right now it's set at 10 days and we will explore with the health districts if that goes to a shortened quarantine period. And yes, students would be able to learn through asynchronous remote learning with Google Classroom. And then just like when we had students out in the past for other illnesses, they would have an equal number of days to make up the work that was required to be completed in the school setting itself. So if they were out for 7 days, they have 7 days to make up that work.
And it is asynchronous, correct?
Asynchronous, that is correct.
You have a question?
My question was about protocol for mask breaks. Will teachers be offering students time outside?
Yes, that would be similar to what we did last year. Obviously, the middle schools finally got to the full day, so they had a good rotation for those mask breaks. The high schools really it's in somewhat dependent on the student's schedule. I don't know, Anna, if you want to talk about the places where we know they can have them, like study hall, it's science labs. PE outside. That's right. I knew there was another one I was forgetting, and then lunch. So within the course of the day, students should have several opportunities. And all, the science labs, right? Yes.
Any other questions?
And certainly board members, if you do have questions, I think I've already answered some of them, but please just continue to email me the questions that you have. All right, so I'm going to minimize the board that's attending remotely and just get very briefly into where we are with the ARC ESSER funding, just because I just want the board to be aware of how we have spent, how much money we actually received and how we have spent that. So I always think it's helpful if you know what the acronym stands for. So ARC is the American Rescue Plan and ESSER is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. So we actually received 3 rounds of ESSER funding. ESSER 1 came very early on, and a lot of it was used just for PPE and plexiglass and all the things that we had to put into place just to make the schools function. It's really ESSER 2 and the ARC ESSER that are the ones that have had the more direct impact on students. The state of Connecticut set funding priorities in 5 areas, so that was essentially what we were encouraged to use the money for. And so in the springtime, when we put out a survey, we asked all of our staff, our parents, and our students what they thought we should spend the money on. And if you look, you'll see that kind of the question and the choices, these proposed choices that we had near the ESSER money, so that way we could get feedback. I won't go into a whole bunch of the details, and actually as a board, you've already received this because I sent all of this data out to you. But I think what's telling is that regardless of the staff, the parents, or the students, the pie chart has a lot of colors. And so what that really suggested to us is that there wasn't any one area that we needed to focus our ARC ESSER money on. It was really a matter of putting it into all of these areas because across the board, everybody felt that these had a different level of priority. So that's essentially what we've done. So a quick summary of the ESSER monies themselves. And again, I didn't put in one because one didn't really have an impact. But basically the ESSER 2 monies gave us about $109 extra per student in the District of Amity. The ARC ESSER gave us another 243. So altogether, over the course of the next 3 years, we had $352 per student, in addition that we can spend. And I'm telling you that because laughably $352 over the course of 3 years is not a whole lot of money. But we are going to make the best use of this money. And so I don't want anybody to be misled into thinking we had this windfall that came to us through our ESSER funding. So what did we use the ESSER 2 money for? We hired a mental health clinician to support our middle schools and actually spread that out over a 2-year period so that the operational budget could eventually absorb that half-time of a clinician, and we would keep them full-time moving forward. We did run, like I said earlier, a robust summer school program for middle school students. We needed to pay for the nurse to run the summer school program and 2 teachers for the high school credit recovery, as well as the enrollment fees for the credit recovery program. We hired 2 support specialists to help with a summer high school re-engagement program that will actually pick up again starting next week. We did offset our food service operating costs since we didn't run the cafeteria. We were quite in the red in our cafeteria books, so we used that. We purchased 1 year of the remaining 1-to-1 devices that we needed to become fully 1-to-1 for grades 7 through 12. We rented the tent that was out in the back parking lot for the end of the year so we can have prom and in creative theater. And then we purchased some additional picnic tables for outdoor dining. You can see most of this is all like this year and this summer. So I would say ESER 2 was really kind of a here and now type of thinking. Whereas the ESER 3 is going forward into the next year and also into the 22-23 school year. So over the course of the next 2 years, we've hired 2 additional math interventionists for our middle schools. So we already have 1 in each middle school. Now we will have 2 in each middle school. This is because of the Smarter Balance results that we received. We know this is an area where we can continue to support our students. We hired a .4 social worker for the high school. Again, the idea over 2 years that eventually the operational budget can absorb that. And we used a .6 that was available from this year's budget. So that way there's no increase to get an additional social worker to help with those mental health needs. We will be putting into place a 3-day-a-week guided study program at both the middle and high schools. So this is essentially after-school academic support, complete with the transportation that's required to get kids home on the late buses. We're looking at changing one of our nursing positions into a 12-month position. This is in part through the contract negotiations, so this doesn't come into play until the next year. But then that way we're able to do all the things that we have to do with respect to school health and nursing. We have extended our Link Crude program for the 10th and 9th grades. Certain students and it'll be part of the regular school day. So again, this is another mental health and executive functioning support that we put in. We provided transportation for our open choice students to attend the summer program this year. We are looking at the construction of outdoor classrooms, 1 for each school. We'll talk a little bit about that later in our finance portion of our meeting. We are looking at our professional development, instructional materials and resources for culturally responsive teaching and improving diversity and inclusion, and that's spread out over the next 2 years. And then looking eventually in the second year to put in a teacher coach, again, to help with that transition from the PD that we received with respect to being diverse and inclusive in our instruction and actually implementing it in the classroom. So that is our ESER funding. So I think that's it. So I am happy to take questions about that.
From the board, have any questions regarding that?
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Dr. Turner.
Hi, just a quick one. You mentioned needing to do more support in math because of the SBACs. Were they distressing?
So they are apparently distressing across the state of Connecticut. So just in conversations with other superintendents, Amity is not in any different place, but that doesn't mean we can't address them. I did check because half of our kids coming up from the middle schools are coming from the elementary districts. So I did kind of verify that they also did not have the results that they would typically have, and they did not. So it's going to be used to support our students. But again, I don't think that we are going to look all that different in terms of the challenges than the other districts in the state.
Okay, were reading and science scores better?
They were not as bad. So, and that, again, that's across the state. So sometimes it can be a result of the test. They were a little closer to what we would expect them to be. So I'm not really sure if that, what the anomaly is there, but it was definitely math where we saw the biggest decrease in what we would typically expect for our student performance.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you for that presentation, Dr. Byers.
All right, thank you.
Moving on, item 7, correspondence. Ms. Eichler, do you have any correspondence?
We did receive correspondence from Chandra Prasad regarding the stadium project, and everyone on the board has received that via email.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the chairman's report. Just a couple of things. I sent you, every board member, an email maybe around 4 o'clock today. I apologize for the lateness of it, but I did promise you I was going to get committee assignments out before the end of the day. So those are in your email if you didn't see them already. Just know, new members, that that the committees are very important in that it's a chance for us to really get together, dig deeper, ask the first round of questions. And the board really takes a lot of care in listening to the committees because they did the preliminary work on that. And so they're very important to be part of. I did say in my email that the new members, I only assigned you one committee to start. That's not to say you can't have more during the year as you progress. And I didn't want to overwhelm you because it's a lot at once. So we can certainly talk about that. I'm open to any discussion on that. Any members that feel that I didn't slot them where they wanted, or they want another one, or they want to make a switch, I'm all there. So you know, I want everyone to feel comfortable where they are, but I also appreciate people coming out of their zone and serving in different capacities that they're not used to, or maybe don't have a professional background in, but are still very helpful for the board in that capacity. So thank you for that. We have a couple of subcommittees and liaison positions that I had addressed in the email as well. Take a look at those. I gave a little summary. We may or may not keep all of those. And the reason I say that is because we may end up having additional committees. We may have a DEI committee. We may have something else in the future. So it's kind of liquid right now with a few different things. But if you are interested in any of those three that I put out there, by all means, please let me know. The other thing I had for you was the board retreat. We're really at the mercy of Mary, who is our facilitator, and she's a very busy person, and she basically came up with a meeting date, which we really had to lock in. So it will be the second board retreat for this year. Will be Monday, September 20th at 5 p.m. And they'll be here, and there'll be a dinner meeting. And we're going to continue with the work that we started. We're going to bring the new board members up to speed with what we discussed. We're going to talk about different subjects with communication, the public, and different Facebook groups and all that good stuff that we have to get our hands around. I know we've all had questions regarding that. We're going to try to continue to learn and work together as being the best board we can be. And so we'll continue that work on the 20th. I did, 5 o'clock, yes. And that's it for me. Committee reports, Dr. Byers, we have a few here that we had vacancies for, so I don't really know how to report on that, but maybe we could get through it together. So the first was ACEs.
And that we didn't have anybody there for, and I'm not even sure if we did much in the summer.
Okay, probably not. And then the ad hoc school safety, Mr. Vanna, you're coming off that, but did you have anything on that at all?
Nothing.
Okay. Kate, that was Miss Krebs, I believe.
Yeah, I did a little research for that, so I have a few updates if you'd like.
Thank you.
Okay. CABE had 2 policy updates that they have available for us. One is on cannabis. They have an update to the recommended drug and alcohol-free workplace policy that we can look at. And there was a Supreme Court case, Mahoney Area School District versus BL, that decided that students do have free speech rights off campus, but that schools can regulate this speech if it causes serious bullying or harassment, threats to teachers and students, breaking school rules for academics or activities, or breaching school security. They have a suggested policy revision to address that case. Second, if anyone's interested in running for school board, which I guess will be mostly useful to people in Orange, but perhaps to looking forward people in the other 2 towns, CABE is running virtual workshops for candidates September 21st, 22nd, or 23rd. And they promoted a resource from the National School Board Association for school boards who want to address educational equity, kind of a roadmap on how to do that. They define that as making sure all students get the resources they need to graduate prepared to be successful. And that's it.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Turner, I wasn't expecting that, but thank you for your first report. Any questions for Dr. Turner on that? Thank you. Curriculum, Ms. Carlson.
So we have nothing to prepare. We're going to come together in September.
Okay, thank you. District health and safety, another one. Now, anything new on that?
Nothing.
Okay. District technology, right? This is a monthly report, page 22 in your packet. facilities. So.
No, Mr. Barr was not, but I think he nominated either Mr. Reed or Ms. White to report out at the meeting.
Okay.
From what I recall.
He did, and unfortunately, I left my notes at home from that meeting, but we did meet out at the stadium to see the progress, and it was really amazing to see all of the work that started and almost finished. We also have to see the lights turn on, and we went through a list of the ongoing projects that have been going on throughout the summer. Pat, I don't remember if you have anything else.
Off the top of my head, I think you kind of covered it. Unfortunately, I am manager right now, so I don't have access to anything from my home office.
I have a question about that. I asked it before and I'll ask it again. Because of Woodbridge delaying it and the equipment sitting there, how much was that? And are we as a board at some point going to see if we can for that money that cost all the taxpayers?
How much was it? About 95,000? So about 90,000 was the cost. We can certainly, and again, the cost of litigating to get that back could potentially exceed what the cost was of the delay itself. So we could definitely speak with the board's attorney about that, but I'm not even sure if that's something that we can do legally, or if it is, if it's going to be financially worth recouping, because I don't know if we actually can.
The point is that it was $90,000.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to finance.
So the first item we have is just a presentation of the 22-23 budget calendar. Just to let you know that we start thinking about next year's budget as soon as school opens. And also tonight we talked about the fund balance and whether that would be appropriated for capital non-recurring. In January is really when the superintendent will present the budget to the finance committee. We'll start to go to the towns to meet with the town finance committee. And the finance committee will have opportunities for workshops in January. If they choose February, the superintendent presents the budget to the board. And again, they would have opportunities for workshops if they so choose. And by March 1st, the finance committee has to make a recommendation to the board of a budget. And the board takes a vote early March. The referendum is set for May 3rd on Tuesday with the public meeting the night before. It's informational as we normally go.
And as I mentioned at AFC, I'll mention it to the board as a whole. You had asked me a couple of years ago to include more sort of presentations up front from our directors and from our principals. We were able to do that pretty well last year because we were meeting every 2 weeks because of COVID. So we were doing those reopening updates and we were sort of sliding these board budget presentations in at the same time. We don't have that same luxury this coming year because unless we decide we want to meet every 2 weeks to talk about COVID again. But we may have to think about some special meetings in November and December so that we are able to have some of those presentations. If not, it can just make for a really long board meeting. And, you know, I think our focus is a little bit better when we can just kind of hone in on those director and principal budget presentations. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to achieve that again. So you go in with full information from the people who are helping build the budget.
That's great. Thank you.
So the next item is the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenditures. Every year we're required to give you an annual report. So we report from the June balance of 2020 to the June balance of 2021. Any money that's been appropriated, bonded for, and put into the fund, less the expenditures, and then the balance of the projects. All these projects are still underway. Fiscal Improvements is just has some architectural work done. We are ready to go out to bid on that, but most of the others are underway. So they're nearing completion on many of them. It's just an informational report, so you know the balance of the account. The next item is about appropriating funds to the capital non-recurring current account from the end of year funds. And I left everyone a revised memo in front of your feet tonight. And really obviously the amount didn't change. We're allowed by state law to put aside 2%. That was changed in June of 21. So we could mirror town boards of ed. That amount would be $1,015,688. And as background, the board did put in last year 1%, which was allowed for roof project, or $495,000. To date, we spent about $405,000 of that money. So that avoided some bonding costs to have to, by putting that money aside. The projects that we are proposing here mostly come from the capital plans. A few items that have arose since the last time we presented the capital plan. By putting aside this money, you can save about 6.6% from next year's capital plan and 0.4% on the following year's operating budget by taking capital items out of the operating budget, putting it into capital non-recurring. Also, there's chiller refurbishment work on there that's scheduled for a bond in 2024 that could be avoided. And we really could address some items in the next couple of years in debt service. What I've done in this memo, different from the one in the packet, is just kind of group them in categories. The board is not required to designate the items at the time of appropriating, but they may feel more comfortable. So I kind of have put them in categories so you can see how they would be addressed. The finance committee approved 1% to put aside. So that is 507, third page, 507, 844.
So yeah, there was a lot of discussion on that. Some of the town members, the finance committees, had concerns with the amount, and they stated that some of the select people had reached out to them as recent as today to discuss the fact. A lot of concern with, just kind of year we had, year we're going to have, and the unknowns, and they thought it was a good idea to go to the 1% again. And I tend to agree with them. I thought that was a very good way to go, and it seemed like across the board, it was a unanimous vote. They did vote 1%. So that's kind of where we are now. So Terry, do we have a motion we have to make at this point for 1%? Set as a whole board?
You have the opportunity to make a motion for anything up to 2%.
Okay.
And what I would suggest is whatever you decide to put aside, that if it is less than 2%, if you stay with the 1% board did, that you just appropriate the funds and let us come back next month with how to designate them, because appropriating them allows us to go forward with the audit, but then we can relook at this list in light of a different amount that's presented.
So really, someone can make a motion for 1% approval or 2% at this point. If someone would want to do that. If someone want to maybe start with that, and then we have discussion on that, see if we would like to vote on that at this point.
I'll make the motion for the unspent funds at 1%.
Some second, Mr. Howard. Does anyone have any comments regarding the 1%?
So here's my take on this. I think it's a good idea, but I think it has to be done every year. We're 3 separate towns and the enrollment shifts. So you're taking money from 3 towns with shifting enrollments, meaning one town will pay more and other towns will pay less and so forth. So if the board, in my opinion, is not going to do this consistently, then one town will pay more and 2 other towns will potentially pay less, because you're taking money now from this past budget and you're spending it on previous or on future budgets. So just be mindful that the enrollment shifts. So, and the different towns pay different amounts of money in the future. So my recommendation would be is, we did it last year. It sounds like it's going to pass again, but just be mindful that it changes based on the money coming in and the money.
And it would be, ideally, we would love to go spend our budget right down to zero, but we know that that's probably not gonna happen, because that would make Terry lose all of her hair if we got ever that close in our budgeting. And ideally, that would be, again, whether you put 2% in now, or you committed to 1% over the course of the years, it still achieves what we're hoping it will achieve, which is to be able to take capital items out of both the operational budget and to not go forward with significant bonding when we need major improvements, because we've been setting aside that money over time. So, but it would, you know, to Mr. Gneo's point, require a commitment that when we have the 1% or, you know, 2% available, then it is something that we do on a consistent basis, or else, you know, at some point we make all the repairs we can, and then we haven't put money in a capital line for a couple of years, and if it's not sitting there, then all of a sudden we have to, and we're looking at a huge budget increase again. So, you know, I think that's a very good point, and I appreciate that, Mr. Gmail.
Was last year, Ms. Lewis, the first year we had the 1% holdback, or was it 2 years ago?
Last year.
Last year, so we've done a 1 year, so this would be our second, whatever we decide here tonight. And I think we've come a long way, because I remember 2 or 3 years ago, that select people came in here demanding 0%. And I think through time, we all of them certainly understood exactly what we're trying to do, and I think they felt comfortable with the fact that we have these larger budget surpluses. We've been fortunate in that, just due to a lot of circumstances and good forecasting, but also just some fortunate times we've had it. And it's proven to be, what, 5 to 7 years that we've had some pretty good budget surpluses that we're able to do this. So the people voted on it. They voted for our budget at that number, and we came in under. So, you know, it is money for the district. We are cognizant too that we want to give money back to the towns, but it certainly makes sense. And I think even a couple of the members tonight from the towns kind of talked about that same thing with the bonding and how it decreases the cost of the bonding, and it just makes sense to use that 1%. So yeah, so it's up to the board if we want to do that tonight. Yes, Dr. Turner.
I have 2 questions. The first is, Terry, do you have an estimate of the difference in the amount of money we would save in bonding at 1% and 2%? The second question is, do you have an idea, is this coming budget year going to be a rough increase? And do you have an estimate of what the difference in budget increase would be at 1% and 2%?
So for bonding, right now, there's less than $1 million, you know, slated for bonding. So it would really be if those would be the items we would tackle first, so that we didn't have to go out to bond. So with the 1%, we will be able to do that. We will be able to not have to do a bond in 2024, obviously barring any catastrophic changes then in our operations. As far as the budget goes, you know, we just negotiated a teacher contract with an increase. We have actually all of our contracts I think negotiated last year. We did it. You know, the first month of medical this year, you'll see when I get into my financial report, is higher than I've seen in at least 5 years. So how that plays out as the year goes on will tell what happens there. We have yet to finish hiring people, so I can't really comment on where salaries are as far as people who've left and come in. Will that help the budget for next year? Have we, you know, brought in people at a lower rate from those who retired? But many were resignations, not retirement. So it's a little early for me to comment on the budget part.
Thank you.
So roughly, though, what's the bonding rate typically get between 2 and 3% lately? The interest rate?
Yeah, last time was low. I think it was a little under 2%. But it all depends at the time you go out to market. So you assume that there's usually about $100,000 just to issue, go out to bond. So you have that cost that's pretty much an automatic, whatever the interest rate.
2%. In this case of, 1 to 2% difference, $500,000 or $100,000 plus the bond issuance cost. Just roll quick.
And again, the 1% would really, we would look at addressing the things that we would go out to bond for. So that doesn't mean that some of the items that would be as part of the capital plan would necessarily come off to lower the operational budget, because we want to make sure that we're not going out to bond first, because it's silly to pay interest and borrow money on money that you actually have sitting there. But at the same time, the expectation that we can somehow use this to offset the operational budget by taking items off of the capital with just the 1%, we may not be able to achieve that, at least not in the first year, but that might be something that we look at doing in subsequent years.
Any other comments or questions? So we have a motion and a second. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So Oladele, Dr. Oladele.
Yep, thank you. I have a question. What led to the change in the recommendation from 2%? And I know there's an updated memo there to 1%.
Well, I would say that the discussion was, we have a couple of members here that were on the committee too, but I think the discussion was that the select people actually came to those people and said that we could support 1%, but we don't see supporting 2%.
So I think our concern was we wouldn't successfully pass the 2%. And so we felt more confident that if we could get the 1% in, we would at least have something in the CNR. So I believe that was the desire of the AFC. That was my interpretation of their decision.
Yes.
Thank you.
If you wouldn't mind just boosting my memory, because I feel like I have pandemic brain. This total request of $1.2 million, about what budget increase percentage point would that be?
So they take items from two different budget years, 23 and 24.
Okay, half that then.
2 years, so 0.6% based off the current budget for 23 and 0.4 for 2024.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? So we have a motion on the table for 1% in a second. So,
And so just because we have another little change, so if everybody's here, you can just vote the ayes, nays, and then I'll just have the people who are on screen, you'll kind of have to hold your hand up and I'll sort of, when I see you, acknowledge your name, and then this Carol can actually record a vote, but it goes a little faster than the roll call, so.
good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Byers. Okay, all those in favor?
Okay, so that's everybody here, and then I see Mr. Reed, Dr. Turner, is Dr. Oladele, and then Ms. Schuster. So everybody.
That's everyone. So that motion passes. Thank you, everyone.
So next we have the final report for fiscal year 21, which will have to be revised based on the vote that was just taken. This was assuming 2%. And basically shows that revenues for the year were up $236,000. That is largely from excess costs for special ed, for students that had needs that were not budgeted for or known at the time we made the budget, but the state gave us reimbursement based on actual costs. Expenditures were down, and as we knew all year, they were salaries were very hard to forecast. We changed our models for substitutes with teachers teaching remote, people on quarantine. It was very difficult all year to kind of get a handle on where that would land. Very little overtime in the classified staff because buildings were closed in the evenings. The largest area is the self-insurance line where claims ran at 75.8%. Budgeted claims, and just to remind everyone that we are self-insured, so that money does stay with the district and does contribute to the surplus. If we were fully insured, that would be a premium paid to Anthem, and they would have those funds to them, and we would not see these funds. Most accounts were under budget. You see, people transportation for one is nearly 1%, 488,000 between special ed. There were no late buses that ran all year, reduced athletic trips, and no field trips were scheduled due to the way we had to operate. The tuition expense for special ed, again, that's a very fluid area. Utilities were down $72,000. Again, not knowing how we were gonna operate the year, we had to change some standards, weren't sure how that was gonna affect the budget, but again, I think with the reduced people in the building, the reduced school day, and no evening activities, utilities were less. Things even like instructional supplies, down 121,000, maintenance supplies, 70,000, favorable. We did spend all the contingency money, for made appropriations throughout the year. So then we talk about the COVID accounts and how we spent the money, and really, you know, part of how we get to this point of having surpluses, we did withhold almost $1 million from the accounts at the beginning of the school year, and all year long just kept waiting to the new plan to change what we had to address, and really we were never comfortable fully expending things unless we knew we absolutely needed to. So even though we took that money, we did not give it back to those accounts. And then throughout the year, as Dr. Byers mentioned in her presentation, grant funds became available that certain things could be charged off there throughout the years to help us that help the operating budget, helps contribute to the surplus. And we, you know, currently have the new rounds of funding that are more will cover new costs and not necessarily budget items. So that kind of summarizes the surplus for 2021. There is in the packet a historical analysis of the whole year in addition to the annual summary of 2021. Do you have any questions on 2021 before I go to 2022? Okay, so 2022, obviously very early to know how well this forecast will pan out, but right now 321,000 favorable, and that's largely special ed, tuition, and transportation, which, as you know, will change month to month. On revenue, right now we're down one tuition student, which is a loss of 17,883. And expenditures, I will note that the first month of claims is 530,000, which is, like I said, the highest I've seen in at least 5 years. So right now, if we were to be on budget for the rest of the months, we would be at 103.6% for insurance.
Both delayed healthcare, so that.
It's something we've been expecting, it's just a matter of when the hammer falls, so to speak, because it's going to at some point.
So that is it on the monthly financial statements. Next, we have the transfers under 3,000 for the current fiscal year. You see there's just one for $400. That's informational. If there is questions, we come to transfers that need action. And the first one is change orders and budget transfers for the capital projects. These all come out of the capital project, the bond money. This is not out of the general operating fund. The first one is, I missed the overhead cost on a change order that was presented earlier for the stadium project for conduits. That was $556. The second one is one of the parts was not available for the air handlers. And we had to go with a different part, which was a price increase of $1,886. Then we had two paving change orders. We had mentioned this to the board in June about fixing the back parking lot where the tent was located, and then the area in front of the field house was cleaned out and freshly paved. So all of those.
And those all did go before finance, and they all approved the change orders and the budget transfers necessary for them, and they did it as one action because it's one item on the agenda.
someone like to make a motion to accept all three together, or do we have to not make that motion because?
No, because
they are-
it's
they are
one
presented?
item, so we
Okay.
can just,
Just a motion to accept them,
yes, to accept and approve the transfer of all four.
all four, correct? Sorry. Okay. Would someone like to make that
I'll
motion?
make the motion to accept and approve the transfer of all four.
Thank you. Would someone like a second? There, thank you. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, and, show of hands for acceptance.
All of those in favor, everybody here, and everybody on the screen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Next is a budget transfer request for the current fiscal year. We have a staff member out on leave of absence, and we are using an independent contractor to cover that absence. So it is a request to move the money from salaries to professional technical services.
So would someone make a motion to accept that?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. For a second. Today, thank you. Any discussion regarding that? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by raising your hands.
So everybody here and on the screen, those in favor? I see everybody. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That passes.
Then we have budget transfers left over from 2021. I asked the board in June to allow us to do transfers over $3,000 to standard year-end transfers to make sure all of our accounts are within budget. You'll see that those really, it's the full year's report, but you'll really see that the year-end transfers start on page 179. They're mostly salary accounts, and we do that once a year, we adjust for all the salary changes throughout the year. And then there's a year-to-date budget report for the bond projects, just by project, how much money has been appropriated and spent, and this was through I think August 2nd. They're well underway for most of them, except for the acoustical project, which will be going out to bid shortly.
No one, any questions on that? We could move on to the next slide.
So, yeah, so we're actually, we missed item G, and so at the facilities committee meeting, we presented to the facilities committee that part of our ESSER funding is to build an outdoor classroom at each of our school locations. So this would be kind of like a permanent pavilion where we would have tables where our students would be able to go outside, both for eating, but also for learning. We would make sure that they were Wi-Fi compatible to the best of our abilities so that they can have their devices out there, and that we would have the security cameras installed so that we would still be able to have viewing of those classrooms. It is not something that will impact the operational budget per se, because it is coming through the ESSER funding, but the board would likely have to approve a contract to build them because it will be over $35,000. And we wanted to make sure that we had the support from the facilities committee as well as the board before we went forward with a permanent structure for an outdoor classroom. So that's why we're bringing that to you this evening. It did pass unanimously at the facilities committee meeting. It's likely not something that we will do immediately. We'll probably delay it until construction costs come down and the cost of wood and supplies lowers as well. But hopefully something that we can accomplish during next summer so that they are ready for the 22-23 school year. If anybody wants to make a motion, so let us go forward with that.
Would someone like to make that motion?
I'll make the motion to go with the outdoor classroom.
And I saw Dr. Turner raise her hand, so perhaps she can be a second. Excellent.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Turner. Any other discussion regarding that? Seeing none, call the vote by hands. All those in favor?
And that's everyone here, and I see everyone on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Right, passes. So are we moving on to policy now. So.
Yes, so we did not meet in July. We met at the beginning of the month, August 3rd, and our next meeting is August 30th at 5:30. So any new board members who are interested in finding out about policy, please come and check us out.
And just so everyone's aware too, with the committees, just because you may not be on a committee, that doesn't preclude you from not going to the committee meeting. Everyone is welcome to visit the committee meetings if there's something of interest to discuss or listen to. So that's open to everyone on the board.
The only thing is we would not have a vote.
Correct. They do not have a vote.
All right, so starting with the review of those that are before the board for first read, 4115.3 is currently in the existing Amity policy. This one has just been updated to review the most recent statutes with respect to coaches, including their evaluation and their termination. So that one is before you just as a revised and updated policy, as something that we already have in place. 4118.5 is also a current Amity policy, and this one has been updated. Really, we combined two policies together, so sort of meshing some email policies within our acceptable computer use policy itself, because both of them seemed a little dated, and this, I believe, brings them up to speed to where we currently have our practices. And so again, it's an existing policy, but updated and revised for today's day and age. 4118.7 is actually a new policy, and I presented it before it went to policy to both Mr. DeRosa as well as Ms. Loomis. We never really had one-to-one devices before for all of our staff, and so this kind of clarifies what our expectations are in policy with respect to their use and the expectation, or setting forth the expectation that those devices really are for school use and for business use and have to be returned to us when the staff leaves Amity's employment. So that would be a new policy that we would be considering. And policy 4121 is again an existing policy that we have on substitute teachers. You can see it's significantly redlined or underlined if you're in the black and white, because that really brings it up to speed to our current practices for how we hire and set rates for subs and how they, the positions are filled and how we even our substitute selection. And again, this also updates all of the legal references with respect to that. So again, mostly with the exception of item number 3, they're all existing policies that we've revised for the first read. So again, first reads are an opportunity for board members to make comments and to send it back to policy on August 30th, so we can make tweaks and edits before it comes for a second read and ultimately a final vote. So if anybody has any comments or suggestions,
Have at it.
Mr. Howard's happy to write them down. Awesome, we're doing a great job then.
Yeah. That's good. No, she was.
Not even I heard that. All right, so going on to second reads, so these would be the ones that we would be looking for approval from the board. Policy 4118.22 would be a new policy for the district, and it's an adoption of the Connecticut Code of Professional Responsibility for Teachers. Teachers are already obligated and held to this, but having it in policy helps when I reference that, particularly if I have to reference it for a disciplinary action. And then certainly identifying that there are staff who also have other codes of ethics with respect to their discipline. Policy 4118.24, during our first read, this was returned back to policy. And we made a small edit, which is highlighted in yellow. If you happen to have a color copy, probably very light gray if you do not. But again, it was clarifying that last statement in the first paragraph that this is a reciprocal expectation between students and staff. And then Policy 4118.51 was also sent back to policy after the first read, and it was really to clarify item number 5 in the third paragraph, that the posts that harm the goodwill and reputation of the district, it specifies that it's related to inflammatory, exaggerated, or unsubstantiated information. So we added that so it's not just a sole interpretation of what is or isn't the goodwill and reputation of the district, but it's related to those particular uses of social media. So those are the policies for second read.
Okay. So you can make a motion
To take them all
take
at
them all
once, yes.
Okay. Would someone like to make that motion?
I'll make the motion to take all 3 policies at once.
Thank you, Cycler, or a second? Who was it?
I actually have a question. I'm sorry.
Let's get to a second and then we can do questions.
Okay. Well, it's a question about the policy, so before I vote on it.
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you, Ms.
Carlson.
Carlson.
Now we can discuss.
Oh, sorry. Well, the question is the non-fraternization. I mean, if I'm correct, it was a sexual harassment policy prior? Or a sexual?
We've always had this policy in place. We actually expanded on it to kind of, I guess, add a little more specificity to what our existing policy already said. So we have a completely separate policy related to sexual harassment. This one was strictly with respect to the staff-student non-fraternization.
Okay, so there is a somewhat of a more detailed policy that defines some of the issues.
Yes, you can see it cross-referenced actually at the bottom where it says CF 5145.5 and 4118.112. Those are cross-referenced to our actual sexual harassment policy.
Okay, all right, so I haven't looked at those, so that answers my question.
Someone.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, that's true.
So this is just the motion to accept.
Correct. So except to take them all
Now we need
together.
Correct. So now we need to vote on that.
Yes.
All those in favor of taking the second reads together, please signify by raising your hand.
That's everybody here and everyone on screen.
Okay, so we will take them together. Now we need a motion to accept.
Yes.
Someone like, Mr. Davis, thank you. Would someone like to second that? There, thank you. Any discussion regarding the policies? Let's call the vote. So all those in favor of acceptance, please submit by raising your hand.
That's everyone here and everyone on screen.
Thank you. Okay, that passes. Moving on to personnel. Do we have anything to report on personnel?
No, we are in the middle of negotiations with our nurses union, and at some point, hopefully about the start of the school year, the para educators will ratify their contract, at which point I will call a personnel meeting. I was kind of trying to hope to get them all together, so that way we could sort of do 2 contracts at once. So we may delay that a little bit, just so we can get everything, depends on how quick the nurses negotiations go. But both of those are in the works.
Okay, excellent. We have any new business? Anyone want to discuss? Saying none, we can move on. Items for the next agenda are usually by August 31st, 2021. And before we adjourn, I just wanted to again say thank you to all our new members joining us. And I hope you have a good career with us and enjoy the work that you'll be doing to serve the district. So thank you again. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Ms. Carlson, thank you. Do we have a second? Mr. Davis, thank you. All those in favor of adjournment?
I see everyone here and everyone on the screen, so fabulous, thank you.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.